Welcome to the Unconventional Dyad podcast, where you'll find broad topics, an unconventional dyad, and one shared goal, educating ourselves through challenging and engaging conversations. Your hosts are Carli and Laura, two graduate students and friends committed to having discussions that are real, raw, and unpolished. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the internship process, specifically the psychology internship process. And Laura and I are right in the middle of applying to internships, choosing the sites that we're going to apply to, writing the essays. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about our experiences, maybe some hiccups that we've already been through, and we are hoping that this episode is going to be helpful for you.
Yes, I think at our school, we don't really get a whole lot of, I don't want to say direction. I think we do get direction on what to do and how to apply, how to write our essays. Our president, the president of our school, looks over all of our essays, so she's very involved. But we don't get a whole lot of information up front about what to expect. And I know for myself, that causes a lot of anxiety. And so I'm hoping that maybe by doing this episode, we can help future applicants kind of figure out what to expect when it comes to the internship application process. So I'm glad that we're doing this episode.
Before we get started, Laura, I'm just kind of checking in and seeing how you're doing right now. I mean, this is kind of a difficult, busy time of the year, just in general, and now with the internship stuff also on our plates. I'm just honestly just wanting to check in and see how you're doing.
Yeah, I'm pretty nervous, to be completely honest. I'm really overwhelmed by the process. I think I've paced myself pretty well, so I'm in a good spot for applications, but I do feel like there's so much to get done. I still need to write most of my cover letters. I've gotten my essays done, but there's just so many things to consider and to think about and so many places to apply to. So I'm personally feeling pretty nervous right now. How are you feeling about everything?
I feel similarly. I pretty much have everything completed. I wanted to front load everything because I don't know exactly what things are going to look like for the month of October, but I'm feeling anxious as well. And I don't exactly know why. I think it's just thinking about the next steps and making sure that the applications go through okay. And so I'm feeling a little bit anxious about it too.
Yeah. How many sites are you applying to?
I am applying to 13 sites. The majority of them are on the East Coast. I have 2 on the West Coast and then 2 within the Midwest. And we can certainly talk about, how both of us decided what sites we're going to apply to. But that's kind of the distribution of where my sites are. Primarily East Coast, 2 on the West Coast, and then 2 in the Midwest. What about you?
Nice. Yeah, I have 15 sites on my list right now, and that's kind of the recommended amount. It seems like that's kind of the max amount that people should strive for. I might end up with either 15, 16, or 17 max, I think, just because I'm geographically limited. I'm trying to play it a little bit on the safe side. So I've kind of gone through my list multiple times, and I actually took off 2 sites yesterday off of my list. I decided I no longer wanted to apply there, just based off of some information that I had read and heard about those sites. They didn't seem like a great fit for me. So I took those 2 off. I probably will add 2 more sites on the list. So I think I'm going to be in the area of 15 sites.
Yeah, and so for our listeners who are starting to think about internship or maybe going through the process, the expenses go up pretty high after 15 sites. So yes. I think, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong here, Laura, but I think the price goes up to about $60 an application after 15 sites.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's low 30s or mid 30s for sites below if you apply to less than 15 sites.
Right. And I think they do that because they're trying to discourage people from applying to way more sites than they really need to apply to.
I mean, it's certainly discouraging me. I've already been taking
Yeah.
sites off because I don't want to pay, or I don't have the capacity to pay for more than 15. So I've been pretty limited in that respect, but I'm wondering if it would be worth talking about what we're looking for in sites. I know you and I are in a little bit of a different position in that I feel like I have more geographical flexibility where I can kind of go anywhere I want, whereas you, I think, are a little bit more confined to the location of your sites.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, why don't you start us off, Carli? I'm curious about which sites you picked and why you picked those sites.
Yeah, I did a lot of searching. So I am primarily interested in sites that are psychoanalytic or at least psychodynamically oriented. So the sites were quite limited already. So I'm essentially going to or applying to sites that even offer some type of psychodynamic psychotherapy or psychoanalytic training. And so there aren't too many out there, but there are resources if you wanted to find what sites are psychoanalytic friendly or primarily psychoanalytic. There are certainly resources available online. We can put that in the show notes. So I looked on those websites and I saw which ones are focused on adults. So I want to work primarily with adults. There are some that work with children as well. So I became limited pretty quickly just because of my interest in psychoanalysis and psychodynamic psychotherapy.
Yeah. Yeah, and most of those happen to be in those geographic areas that you mentioned.
Yeah, most on the East Coast. There are 2 or 3 in the Midwest, and then a few on the West Coast, but that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot of options out there for people who want to focus more on that.
Yeah. I am a little more geographically limited in terms of which sites I can apply to and attend next year. So I'm married, and my husband and I just recently bought a house in Wisconsin, in the Wisconsin area. And we also just recently got a dog. And so I really am pretty limited location-wise. And so I'm trying to apply mostly to sites in Wisconsin. I am applying out of state, primarily in the Chicago area. But out of state, I'm really limiting those sites to VAs because that's really kind of where I want to go into. I want to get an internship in a VA somewhere. And so I figured if I'm going to apply out of state and have to commute to Chicago, I might as well only apply to sites that, I would be really happy at. And so, yeah, I'm mostly applying to VAs. I would also be really happy with a Department of Corrections placement or some sort of community mental health placement. Those are my 3 biggest interests right now. So I'm hoping and keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that I just get a placement in one of those 3. I am applying to other places as well. I'm applying to as many Wisconsin sites as I possibly can. There's maybe like 2 that I've taken off my list because I haven't heard great things about them. But I am applying to all sorts of sites. So at this point, like I said, I'm kind of hoping for a VA placement, but I'm really taking whatever I can get, whatever I feel like will be a good fit for me in the end. I have a question for you, Carli. I'm wondering about this question of fit and what's a good fit for an internship site for you. And I wonder how you're going to figure that out for yourself.
I think this question is so multifaceted because we are dealing with COVID right now. The majority of the interviews are going to be virtual. I do have a few that they really want you to come in person. But most of the interviews are going to be virtual. And I think it's going to be really hard to assess fit, not only as a student interested in assessing fit of that particular site, but also the site assessing the fit for you too. I think it's going to be really challenging. And I'm kind of curious about if they're going to change, the questions that they ask or exactly what they're going to be looking for. I surely don't know. And I don't know if we can really prepare for that necessarily. But I think assessing fit is going to be a lot harder now due to COVID because the interviews will be virtual. You aren't really going to be able to see the sites. You aren't going to be able to meet, a bunch of people. So it is going to be very different.
Yeah. I'm nervous about that. I remember applying to practicum placements and not really knowing just what that placement was going to look like until I really got there. And I was able to take a tour and meet my potential supervisors and other students and speak with them. And I wish we could still do that. I wish we could visit all these places and get a feel for the placements. So I'm pretty nervous about that and figuring out, am I a good fit for this site? Are they a good fit for me? I think that is going to be challenging.
It also brings me to more of my theoretical orientation. I tend to be a lot more collaborative in therapy than maybe some other folks. And I'm also really expecting that out of the program too. I think that assessing fit, I think, is a very collaborative process. And I'm imagining that being a lot more difficult with virtual interviews, because though you might be one-on-one for an interview, I just feel like talking in general virtually is just so difficult. And I'm just imagining that being really difficult to do collaboratively, kind of assessing fit and asking questions and answering questions. I don't know if you've been thinking about that at all, about what those virtual interviews are going to look like.
Yeah, I have been thinking about that. It's just going to be so challenging. I agree with you. I think when we enter a virtual space, there's a different feel, there's a different energy. I really like to go off of people's, energies. And I know that's going to sound a little woo-woo and out there, but I feel like I get something out of being in close proximity with another human being that I'm speaking to in a way that I don't get the same thing virtually. So I am curious to see how the virtual interviews are going to go and whether or not I will feel satisfied with my experience in the virtual space.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about questions that would be asked potentially. And I'm just imagining that it being a little bit more close-ended, like, what experiences have you had? How many experiences? Because I just feel like when you're in a space with someone in the same room, there's a sense of kind of collaboration that happens. There's a sense of like working off of one another's ideas. There's a sense of kind of this ongoing conversation. I just see that being a lot more difficult in virtual space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which makes me a little bit nervous. It makes me nervous because I feel like I am a lot more better at having a conversation with someone than I am actually just answering questions and asking questions. I feel like I don't feel like I'm a very good interviewee necessarily. Yeah. It's not my forte.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like you can really be super conversational in a virtual setting, and I like doing that in an in-person setting, and we're not going to really get to do that this time around. But I am going to definitely have some questions prepared for my interviewers because I do want to get as much of a sense of what their site is like. So I think one of the things I'm really going to make sure I get clarity on is what their supervision and training really looks like, what they kind of expect out of their trainees. Like, I want to get more information on that because I think that'll say a lot about the placement. Like, I think I'm similar to you, Carli, in some ways, in the sense that I do really value collaboration a lot when it comes to therapy. I love doing group supervisions and consulting in a big group with other individuals and hearing from medical providers and hearing from nurses and other therapists. So I really hope to get some more clarity on what that looks like at specific sites.
Do you find it anxiety provoking to think about ways that you can stand out on these interviews?
Yeah, absolutely do. Yeah. I absolutely do. I mean, even in my essays, right? Like, I just finished writing my last essay and editing my last essay, and I feel pretty good about them. But I struggled so much to make myself stand out. And I think sometimes I think about that too much. Like, I wonder what other people are writing and what they're saying and how I can differentiate myself from that. And I think it's going to be the same thing when it comes to interviews. There's going to be a lot of anticipatory anxiety on my behalf because, yeah, I'm just going to be worried about how do I make myself look unique and how do I show them what I can bring to the table that nobody else can bring to the table. I think it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling about that?
I mean, even in the recordings that we've been doing for the podcast, I feel like you're much more proactive and active than I am. I find myself to be very passive and more of a listener. And that's just where I feel the most comfortable. And I'm going to have to really challenge myself to maybe be a little bit more proactive and more engaging kind of right off the bat, because who wants to sit in silence and reflect and think when you have 30 or 45 minutes to, you know, for an interview? I really have to rethink how I interact with people.
Yeah. You know, I do wish we did have that. We did have more of that reflection and time to think and silence, because I think we've talked about how important it is in therapy, and I think it's important in every aspect of our lives. But I also think that the way our society is set up, it doesn't create space for that. And especially in a competitive situation like this one, there's almost no time for silence and reflection unless you're extremely proactive about that, you know, and you really make space for that.
Yeah. And I tend to be very intentional. What I say is intentional, what I think is very intentional. And it just makes me really nervous to go into an interview and you're given a pretty small portion of time and really having to talk more than you maybe want to. It just makes me very anxious to even imagine that.
Yeah, I feel that too. I'm with you on that one. Yeah. So should we maybe talk a little bit about what it's been like for us to maybe write some of our essays or ask for recommendation letters? I'm curious about what that process has been like for you, because I know you're done writing your essays and you've asked for all your recommendation letters. What was that like? How did you approach those two things?
Wow. Yeah. So my essays have went through several iterations, and I think what I have in mind for each essay is to really build on one another. And so I've went back to change them several times. I mean, the school's president looks them over, and there's really been only one that she's kind of been okay with. So all the others I've had to have some pretty significant modifications, which looking back, I really, really appreciate having her look at these essays. I'm very grateful. But I've just really had to rethink how I structure them. And so, yeah, it's been a process, that's for sure.
When you say you want them to play off of each other, what do you mean? What does that look like?
Maybe I'm thinking about this too much, but it's almost like a story. Like I'm telling a story. And they aren't necessarily independent entities. I mean, they're obviously different essays. One's the autobiographical essay, one's the theoretical orientation essay, but they can be read as a whole story, I think, like a storyline. So I've been thinking a lot about what I want to say where, and kind of ending the research essay is the last one. And it's very interesting because I start out with the autobiographical essay talking a little bit about grief and loss. And I end up talking about my research, which is also on grief and loss. And then there's a story that is connected between those two. So I've been thinking a little bit about just the storyline and really ultimately how it reflects who I am as a person. And you seem to be like, yeah, maybe I did that too.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I did it quite as I think your approach was a little more sophisticated than mine, but I mean, I love what you're saying. Like, I love that idea of creating a story with these 4 different essays, which at first glance seem very like kind of cold and clinical to me. When I first started the process, I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like warm or comfortable, but I love how you infuse them with your own story. And I did think along the same lines. I mean, I don't think mine are as connected to one another, but I tried to make every single essay a narrative. And that was very purposeful and intentional on my part. Like, that's what I wanted to do, is create a story for each essay. I didn't want to just write, a boring face value kind of thing. I really wanted to create a narrative for each one. So I think, it's funny because we haven't really talked about this before, but it's funny that we both kind of approached it from a storytelling perspective.
I guess it doesn't really surprise me that we both thought of them that way. Just kind of who we are. And I think we both believe that stories matter. And in fact, I talk a lot about other people's stories. I've been thinking about this more and more, but just the various social movements happening right now. And I don't know if my story is the one needing to be told right now. And I made that very intentional, that I think we need to be very cognizant of what is happening right now in our social lives. And I made that very clear in my essays.
That's beautiful. I don't think you'll have any issues standing out with those kinds of essays, Carli.
Well, there's 2 sides to that coin. I think it is high risk, and it's interesting because for the diversity essay, we are required to talk about the experiences that we've been given.
Yeah.
And my statement was very bold, and when I sent it off to our president, I said, I don't know if you're going to like this. I specifically said, I don't know if you're going to like this. It's very bold. And that was the one essay that she didn't really touch. She's like, I think it needs to be bold. And I'm like, wow, okay.
That's amazing. That must have been really validating to get that feedback.
But again, it's a risk. I think there's a risk to really anything that you write, and I think that one is maybe a little bit more higher risk than maybe some of the other essays.
Yeah, you mentioned to me before this fear or worry about perhaps revealing too much about yourself. I'm not sure if I'm wording this correctly. But you've talked about like the need to kind of keep yourself a little bit more anonymous. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I know that we've certainly talked about this. I have a really hard time with self-disclosure, and I find this a little bit ironic because we are both on a podcast right now, and we are both kind of putting our lives out there. But this is multi-tiered here. So this question, I think, needs to be explored in bigger depth than what we're able to do today. But I think to start out, I think it was really important for Laura and I to remain somewhat anonymous. Like, we don't necessarily disclose what school we go to. We don't necessarily share where we live. I mean, certainly people can go out and try to find us, and they probably will be able to find us. But I think a lot of what I share, I'm afraid that it will be used against me, not necessarily in a paranoid way, but just that I won't be as desirable because of some of the views that I hold. And so I do think about that a lot. And I certainly did not self-disclose a whole lot about my personal life in the essays. I did, however, disclose a whole lot about what I think and how I approach therapy. I think that's a pretty big self-disclosure, but I don't necessarily share anything really about my childhood, about how I was raised, about various experiences I've been given. I pretty much kept that out of the essays.
Yeah. I definitely understand that need for a little bit of anonymity. I feel similarly. Sometimes it's the same thing. I mean, it's not really a paranoid thing. It's almost like I'm nervous that somehow in the future something will come back to bite me in the butt. And that makes me nervous. But I think I try to do the same thing as you, Carly, in that in my essays, I do reveal a lot about my own personal beliefs and my values, because I do want the sites that I apply to be aware of those things and to be honest about their own beliefs and values, because I want those two things to align when it comes to picking an internship site. So I think it's important to disclose some of that.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of any specific values that you put in the essays that, that maybe was a thread throughout all your essays?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest ones for me is just I really value learning a lot, and I value humility, and I value humility in learning. And that's something that I strive for in my own work, and I hope that whatever site I end up at is the kind of place where they encourage learning, they encourage humility, they want to hear different perspectives, and they're always open to growing, because that's the kind of clinician that I want to end up, continuing to be. So that's one thing that I've emphasized in all of my essays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I see you that way too, and I think it makes a lot of sense why you would talk about that in your essays. I see you as being, someone who is always wanting to learn and always wanting to grow and collaborate, and so I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are there any values that you feel like you revealed in your essays?
I do talk about one in all of my essays, and it's something that I think I cultivated in undergrad, is kind of the importance of interpersonal connection. I do talk a little bit about kind of how my advisory relationships, my supervisory relationships, helped me cultivate a good sense of kind of finding a balance between autonomy and dependency, kind of being a leader versus being a follower. So really finding a balance. And ultimately that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for some type of relationship that I've developed with someone like a supervisor or advisor. So I think a theme that really runs through all of my essays is the importance of interpersonal connection, and really ultimately how those connections can help facilitate change. And that's all. I mean, I think of therapy that way too. So I kind of tie that into the theoretical orientation essay, and it kind of goes through with my experiences working with various diverse groups, which that's a whole nother conversation that I think we can have about how to even write that essay, especially during this time of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that's maybe something that needs to be discussed on another podcast episode. But yeah, so that theme kind of runs through all of my essays.
Beautiful. Speaking of relationships, how did you decide which supervisors to ask for recommendation letters?
That is such a good question. And I don't think I put too much thought into if I think they would have been a good letter writer or not. I think I just happen to get along really well with these supervisors, and I think they know me at a very personal level, and I think that I just thought that they would kind of know me the best on a kind of a personal level, and also a clinical level too, but just people I am pretty close with and I work with often. So I happen to just choose those people. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into what exactly they're going to be writing about me. Yeah. What about you?
It sounds like you kind of went with maybe your gut feeling on that one a little bit. Yeah, I tried to do the same thing. I think I also tried to balance a little bit of like, what does this supervisor do for a living? For example, I'm applying to a lot of VA sites, so I wanted to have somebody who is knowledgeable about the VA world to write one of my letters. And so you actually helped me pick that person, Carly, because you suggested that person to me. And I hadn't thought about her prior to that, but she knows me pretty well. She's on my dissertation committee, and she's just an incredible person in general. And I felt like she would be a good person to write a letter for me. So I tried to kind of think about, what are the supervisors' backgrounds, but ultimately I did decide on people who actually have worked with me closely and who know me well. I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm. I am applying to one university counseling site, so I did reach out to that particular supervisor, and I don't think she knows me particularly well, but she knows how I work in that environment. So I think I'll specify her for that particular site that I'm applying to, but all the others are just people who know me really well and really know, I think more importantly is knowing my areas of growth, maybe more than I do.
Yes.
And are able to talk about it.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, absolutely agree. I think it's important to pick individuals who know your strengths and your weaknesses when it comes to letter writing, because they can provide a really honest, just view of kind of how you operate and how you function in certain settings. And I think that'll ultimately be helpful in choosing which site to end up at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from what I know, I don't know a whole lot about the new letter writing kind of document that they use. I know it has changed, so they do have to talk specifically about areas of growth. And so that was on my mind when I was choosing people to write letters. Okay, who really knows me well and who knows where what else I can do, how I can grow. And I think that's, for me, and I mean, I think both of us actually, that's so important to recognize where we fall short, or really maybe, not even fall short, but maybe just things we haven't even experienced yet. I mean, I think that's just so important to recognize, and being able to be open enough for those supervisors to share that information on the letter,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you kind of have to be open with the supervisors before you even get to that point where you're asking them to be open about you in these rec letters. Like, you have to kind of, like you said, the relationship is so important. You kind of have to build this true and honest relationship with the supervisor and ask individuals to write you rec letters who actually truly know you. Yeah.
Do you think we have time to go to the diversity essay idea?
Sure.
Do we have time to do that today?
Let's do it.
Yeah. So I wrote a blog post recently about kind of how we go about writing the diversity essay. And I feel really strongly about this, and it's something that I want to continue thinking about. But the diversity essay, I don't know the prompt exactly, but it asks specifically about experiences you've been given working with diverse populations.
Yep.
And something about writing that essay just felt really, really wrong to me. And utilizing the experiences that essentially were handed to you, given, put on your lap, put on your plate, kind of using those experiences and using those people to better your chances of getting into a particular internship site. That just seems so wrong to me to do that.
It does. Yeah, it does. I wrote about one specific client for my diversity essay, and that felt just so personal to me. And I did feel a lot of guilt doing that. And, I was reading online about what people recommend in terms of writing the diversity essay. And a lot of people were saying, like, it can be really helpful to just present a single case and talk about it in depth. And so I ultimately decided to do that. But there is something icky about doing that and about using other people's lives and stories and experience to enhance your own and to enhance your own chances of getting into an internship placement. Yeah, what kind of changes do you want to see in that area, or what would you rather we do? I don't even know. I feel like so many places now emphasize diversity. I mean, which is good, right? But I think it's also, there's some problems with doing that, because then everybody's in competition to prove that they're the most open and the most experienced. It does feel a little wrong to do that.
And it seems to me, the individuals who are saying that or thinking that maybe aren't all that culturally competent to begin with. It just, the process itself, I think, is very flawed. And I'm, again, getting a little bit bold, but I don't know another option here. I don't know what could be done, but I will say what I did do was talk about why utilizing people's experiences like that is not a great thing. And I wrote about that in my essay.
Good for you.
Well, we'll see what happens, but I talk a lot about where I went wrong in cases.
Yes.
I talked about how my views have shifted even the short amount of time in the last several months, how my views on society at large have changed. And I feel like what clinicians need to do next as just clinicians, as psychologists, as ethical practitioners, what we need to do next.
Yes. I love that. Yeah, I also wrote about where I fell short with my particular client. And I think that's really important when we're talking about diversity and we're talking about inclusivity. We have to be willing to look at ourselves, look at our shortcomings, and admit when we're wrong, admit when we don't know what to do, admit when we need help. So I think if there's anything I can offer to others who are thinking about writing this essay eventually, maybe they're working on it right now, I think one thing to consider is, where do you fall short and where can you keep growing and improving when it comes to issues of diversity and multiculturalism, social justice?
It's so hard because I feel like there's a pretty large divide between psychologists who think that we need to do more in terms of social activism, being active, and there's also those who think that's outside of our responsibility or outside of kind of just the profession in general. So I feel like there's two types of people. I think we've witnessed both in our program.
Oh, yeah.
But I will say that I was pretty scared to do more. I was scared to think about diversity differently, to be more active. I was very scared up until this last year, and my kind of fear went away.
Me too. Me too. Yeah, when I first started this program, I was so scared to reveal what my personal beliefs were, like political beliefs, beliefs about social justice and what needs to be done in that arena. Being an activist and speaking up for people, we were both discouraged from doing that in our first year of school. And I think that stuck with me for a long time. And yeah, same with me. Only recently did I just kind of embrace that and accept it. And honestly, like, I am somebody who is passionate about these issues. I am somebody who likes to speak up and be vocal about things like climate change and racial injustice. And I still have a lot of work to do in my own life to make sure that I'm not living a problematic life when it comes to, empowering and holding up other individuals. But like, that is a huge part of who I am. So why would I hide that in my clinical practice? So I think I'm getting more comfortable with that, and I'm embracing that as part of my identity, my professional and personal identity, a little bit more.
You bring up a really good point about this need, this fear, whatever it might be, of being hidden, like feeling the need to stay and remain hidden. And I also, the flip side of that is, if you do stay hidden, you aren't being truly revealed. You aren't kind of showing who you really are. And I think that's an ethical issue. If you're kind of misrepresenting yourself and your views, isn't that maybe a little bit of an ethical issue? I don't know.
I would think so. I think it is. I think there's some people who would disagree.
Oh, sure.
And, but I definitely think it is. I mean, let's be honest, right? We all bring our own beliefs and values and identities to the room, like when we're doing therapy with people. There's no way we can hide that. I mean, most individuals, when we walk in, they see us, right? So there's certain aspects of ourselves that we can't hide. And why would we, hide other aspects that could potentially be beneficial or that might actually open up a door in therapy or in our clinical work.
I wonder, Laura, if the sites that you're applying to are pretty restrictive, like both in terms of where you're applying demographically, and I'm curious about your comfort level, maybe disclosing more parts of yourself, maybe not so much in the areas of like your personal life, but more of in that diversity essay. What's your comfort level sharing that with your readers?
To be honest, I've had to learn to be comfortable with it because I think it's just so important that I reveal that about myself to the sites that I'm applying to. I think it'll do both of us, myself and my future supervisors, a disservice to hide that. I think at some point it'll come out, whether, because I intended it to come out or because I didn't, like accidentally maybe. So, I've kind of decided that I need to be comfortable with that. And honestly, I don't necessarily want to work somewhere where my values don't align with the site's values. And I know that's hard to say because ultimately I want to get an internship and graduate and get my degree, right? So obviously I have to balance that with, finding a place that aligns with my values. But I feel like I'm applying to enough places that I feel pretty comfortable revealing that. And if there are people who don't feel like my values fit well with their site, then that's fine. And I would rather not be chosen to go to that site. So I think I'm getting more and more comfortable with it. But yeah, I mean, I do have to think about, what if I don't get a placement this year and I have to reapply next year? I mean, my goal is to go on internship next year and to graduate. So it would be pretty heartbreaking to be turned away from all of these sites and have to take an extra year. But
I'm in a very similar point, I think, where I don't really want to go somewhere with values different than my own. I feel like about half of the sites that I'm applying to make it very explicit what their views and values are, which I very much appreciate. It's right in their It's right in their statement it's right at the top of their website. This is what we believe in. This is what we value. I very much appreciate that you get a sense of who these people are, what they're looking for, what their values are. There are some others where it's a little bit tricky to find. And I feel less comfortable kind of sharing my values with them. But again, like you, Laura, I don't know if I want to work somewhere who doesn't accept where I'm coming from, because I mean, truly, I can work with just about anyone. But on the flip side, they have a little bit of power here in kind of choosing who they want to bring on or not.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, they do.
So it is a little bit anxiety provoking, but I'm certainly open to sharing what's on my mind in terms of my values. And if they like that, they like it. And if not, then I don't know if I want to go there.
Yeah, I think I've seen too many friends and family members work for big corporations that just do not align with my friends and family members' values. And I've seen how difficult that is. And I myself have been in situations in the past, in employment situations, where I worked for a company that I didn't feel like valued the same things that I did. And that was hard. It was hard for me to wake up every day and go to that job. And it was hard to stay motivated. So I don't want to fall in that trap. I think the older I get and the more I go through in life, the more I realize how important that is. So it's a risk I'm willing to take, I think.
Do you think you would have said the same thing 6 months ago?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't have said the same thing when I started school. Definitely not. Even 6 months ago, definitely not. I was so nervous about applying to internships that I was like, I'm just gonna take whatever I can get. And now I'm at a point where I'm a little bit more confident in myself, but I'm also willing to say, if it doesn't work out this year, it just doesn't work out. So, I'm going to do everything I possibly can, but ultimately I want to go to a site where I'm happy.
Yeah, me too. I've come to that conclusion within the last 6 or so months, where I've become much more open to not being okay with, the sites,
Yep.
just letting them go.
What do you think has changed for you in the last 6 or 7 months that's allowed you to get to that point?
I don't want to get too existential, but I just think my view, we're laughing because we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
There's some crazy stuff happening around us. I just feel like that puts things in perspective. I've certainly been reevaluating what I find important.
Yeah.
And I think I've come to a pretty good understanding of what I find important and what I'm allowing myself to be put through, essentially.
Yes.
And kind of taking care of myself and sticking up for myself a little bit more.
Absolutely. I think this pandemic has really opened my eyes to so many problems in society that I was kind of blind to prior to this. And one big thing that I've taken away from, well, two big things I've taken away from COVID-19. Number one, life is really too short. And I feel like we always hear people say that. And I kind of roll my eyes at people when they say that, but it's so true. I mean, life is just so incredibly short. And so many people have lost their lives this year for multiple reasons. But I'm going to do what makes me happy in the life that I have. And I think the other thing that COVID-19 has shown me is that I value people over profit, and I need to start living that in my life. I just feel like I'm less willing to engage in capitalist systems that put people down and make them nothing more than objects or machines that produce things for consumption, for economic reasons, for money. So those are the two big takeaways that I think have shifted my whole perspective and what I'm willing to prioritize in my life.
Mm-hmm. Another way my perspective has shifted, and maybe we can even end with this because it's kind of getting outside of the realm of psychology and internship, is just doing something more, doing something extra, getting uncomfortable. I feel like we have a responsibility, especially as white people, to go above and beyond. And that's something that I've really been reflecting on, is what can we do to make society just a better place in general. Yeah. And sometimes that is not what we want to do. It is not something that we even think we have energy for, but yes. It's what we have to do. And I've been thinking about that a lot more, and what that means as a future psychologist in the field, and ways that I'm kind of already thinking about how I'm going to shift my practice and how I'm going to kind of work with patients. So.
Yes. Beautiful. Yes. Let's end on that today. Thank you for your thoughts today, Carli.
No, thank you. I'm glad we did this episode. I'm hoping that people find it somewhat enjoyable to listen to.
I am as well. And we're planning on doing kind of a little bit of a mini series on this topic. Is that right? Mm-hmm. An internship mini series. Mm-hmm. So we will be talking about this again. I'm sure as the process keeps unfolding for Carli and I, we're going to have other things to share about the internship application process. And so, yeah, we'll continue this conversation in the next couple episodes.
This episode of the Unconventional Dyad podcast is sponsored by Anchor. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. The most important thing about Anchor is that it's free. They also have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Hello, Unconventional Dyad podcast listeners. We are so excited that you are joining the conversation with us. If you're liking what you're hearing and you would like to support the podcast, there are a few different ways to do that. We have a Patreon page now. So if you visit patreon.com/unconventionaldyad, you can support us through 4 different support tiers. You can also support us through the Anchor app. There's a support function, and you can choose from 3 different tiers from as little as 99 cents per month. We really hope that you are liking the content so far. You can also check out our website where we post weekly blogs that you can comment on, and we hope that you join in the conversation with us. Let us know what you think.
Distraction standing by, but we're too preoccupied with the money and fame. The world could be exploding, but it wouldn't bother us, 'cause we want money and fame. Distraction standing